The fact that this made me cry my eyes out at the end. Thriller books were so good. I'm just thinking about this world and wanting to be back in it so bad. Hello, welcome back to my channel. I'm talking about all of my top favorite books, and originally this was going to be a 10 book video, but I couldn't pick just 10, so it's 12. So welcome to my top 12 books of all time. We're gonna get cozy, grab a coffee. I've got a nice latte here. We're just gonna chat about all the books. I read almost every genre. I am a mood reader, and so there's not necessarily one particular genre that I like more than others. It just all really depends on the mood that I'm in at the time. And so you're gonna see a variety of things from romance to mystery, thriller, to historical fiction, to literary, and all the things in between. Because I'm just now getting into fantasy and I'm just now dipping my toes into that genre, I honestly feel a little bit intimidated by it, and I don't know exactly what I'm talking about when it comes to fantasy. So I don't have any fantasy on my list of favorite things of all time, but these are the books that I read. Most of them I read in my first 2 years of getting back into reading. I think about these books literally all the time. At least once a week, one of these books comes to mind, and I really love that. I love that they live with me. So without further ado, let's just get started. All right, the first genre that I'm going to talk about is literary or general fiction, and I've got 2 books to share with you. The first one is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Before reading Daisy Jones, I actually read Malibu Rising and I loved it. I ate it up. So I knew I needed to read another one of her books, and this one is highly rated for many good reasons. This is a really unique book. It's written in the form of an interview, so when you look at the pages, it'll say Daisy, what she's saying, character name, what she's saying, etc. I thought that was going to be intimidating for me. It doesn't sound like something I would typically read. I really love dialogue and I love lyrical prose and all of those types of things, and so I was honestly a little bit intimidated to read this because I didn't know if I was going to like it, and I ate it up. It took me like 1 or 2 chapters to get used to their writing style, and then I just flew through it. I think I read this in a day or so. I cried at the end of this book, and I do not cry easily. It takes a lot for me to cry in a book, and I can feel my emotions deeply, but actually getting the tears out of my eyes is not something that happens a lot to me when I'm reading. The fact that this made me cry my eyes out at the end, it was so beautiful. It was such a good story. It has flawed characters that feel like real people. It's based on a real story, and so I think that Taylor does an amazing job about taking real stories and real people and fictionalizing it enough where we can get a novel, but also just keeping them real characters. They feel like people that I would know in real life. This follows Daisy as she is kind of coming of age in LA in the 70s and 80s during the music revolution, I guess is what you would say. She becomes part of a band, and it just goes through her life and the life of the band and everything that happens with her in different relationships with people, with friends and romantic relationships and all the things. And honestly, I don't like reading books about music particularly either. Like, if someone told me to read this because it's about a band, I would probably not have picked it up. You just come to really love the characters, and you appreciate redemptive elements in it, and you appreciate the fact that they're real and vulnerable and that they're going through really hard things and they make mistakes and they learn from them and all the things. So it was just such a beautiful story, and I really need to reread this at some point. The next book in this category is Love and Saffron. This book was recommended on the Modern Mrs. Darcy What Should I Read Next podcast, which if you don't listen to that podcast, I really recommend it. Side note, I'm not a huge podcast person. I don't listen to a lot of them, but when I do, I love listening to hers because I always get so many good book recommendations. So it's a novel of friendship, food, and love. This book is, I would consider this a novella. It is, let's see, 189 pages. I read this in like an hour or an hour and a half. This is letters back and forth between a girl who is coming of age in the 60s. She is a journalist and loves food, and then she's writing to somebody who used to be a journalist who was like a really well-known food journalist, and so she's kind of getting advice from this person, and they end up just becoming friends through letters, and you get to know them as people and the things that they love and things that they're struggling with. And it was just such a beautiful story. I was crying in this book. Again, what is it with these two books making me actually cry? I don't cry very often, like I said, so this was such a beautiful story, and I recommend it to everybody. Next category I'm going to be talking about is thriller mystery genre. I've got 4 books to share for this. All of these books stay with me all the time for more reasons than just thriller things. Side note, if you love thriller books, something about 2 or 3 years ago, thriller books were so good. They were so good, and so many of them are just not the same anymore. I have not really run into a new thriller that has hit the same. Okay, the first one is The Girl in the Train by Paula Hawkins. This is an unreliable narrator story. If you do not like unreliable narrators, this book is not for you, but I love it because I love the angst and trying to figure out what's real, what's not real. This girl is struggling with alcoholism, which she's very open about in the beginning, so that's not a spoiler. She rides a train every day to work. On her way to work, she passes by these houses that have people living in them, obviously, and so she gets to witness these people every single day and what they're doing in the few, seconds as she's driving by. She thinks of them as her friends in her mind, and that's one of the things where you're trying to figure out, are they really friends? Is this just her in her brain thinking that they're friends because she's crazy? One day something happens. She has to figure out what's happening to these people that she is witnessing. Something different happens. Their routines are messed up. She's concerned for them. And so it's her trying to figure out what's going on with her friends. I just loved it. It was a little bit of a slow burn for probably the first 2/3 of the book. It's not the type of slow burn where nothing's happening. It's building up to a point where it needed to be slow. You're learning about the different characters, you're getting backstory, you're getting to know them as people, and then the climax happens and it makes the slow burn worth it. I have read this twice. So the second time I read it, I had waited long enough that I forgot some details, and it was like rereading it again for the first time, and it was so much fun. If you love a vibey, spooky ride, no pun intended, then I really think that you're gonna like this one. The next book that I'm gonna talk about is a book that you probably have all heard of. That's The Silent Patient. Again, this is one of the very first books that I ever read when I started rereading, and I could not put this down. I started reading it and literally read it in less than 48 hours. I was hooked from the beginning. The writing, again, kind of just made me feel like, what's going on? I have to know what's going on. The chapters were short, so it was easy to fly through it. And I can't tell you anything other than at the beginning of the book, this woman kills her husband and she's put in an insane asylum, and she hasn't spoken since. And so we're following this guy who's trying to get her to speak to figure out what really happened. Do we know if she really killed him, or was she set up to, make it look like she did? Like, what is actually happening here? Plot twist at the end. Oh my word, was so good. Still one of the best plot twists. I really want to reread this, but because I know the plot twist, it's probably not going to hit the same, and that's okay. But it is one of those books I wish I could read for the first time again, not knowing anything. It was so good. The next book is The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. This is actually a series. There are 4 books total, and I've read the first 3 of them. We are following Elizabeth and her friends in a retirement home. It's a renovated castle type situation in London. It's got beautiful scenery, and it's all old people solving murders. So if you love that vibe, it's got kind of a satirical element. It's funny, but the mystery is actually really good. It's kind of thinking outside the box. It's not just a copy paste of every other mystery book out there. This is definitely more on the mystery side than it is on the thriller side, and you come to really love the characters, which is why you come back to the series. So I recommend this if you love a mystery but you don't really want to get like the icky feeling. The last book that I'm talking about in this category is The Cuckoo's Calling by Robert Galbraith. This is also a series. There are currently 7 books. Yeah, there are currently 7 books, and I've read every single one of them, and we're waiting to hear when the 8th one comes out, and I can't wait. If you don't know, Robert Galbraith is actually the pseudonym of J.K. Rowling. If you've read the Harry Potter series and you've loved it, I think that you're gonna like this too, but this is not fantasy at all. These are crime, mystery, thrillers. And again, each book has its own mystery that the characters are trying to solve, but the reason that you love the books is because of the characters. She does such an amazing job fleshing out the characters where they feel real. You really get to know their thoughts, not just facts about them, but how they think and why they think that way. I cannot wait to read the next one, and when she's finished with this series, I'm 100% going to be rereading these. The mysteries are very outside the box. I would consider this like a modern Agatha Christie. They're unique, and they're not mysteries that every other person has done before. But again, you just really fall in love with the characters, and I'm just thinking about this world and wanting to be back in it so bad. J.K. Rowling is a amazing writer. The stories are beautiful. They are flawed people, but they're learning along the way, and I think that that's a theme that you've seen so far. Is I really like when characters feel like real people, where the problems they have could actually happen to someone like me, instead of just like in this world that is completely unrealistic. The main character is a war vet, and something you find out pretty early on is that he has lost a leg, so he only has one leg and he's got a prosthetic leg. It's following him and how he struggles with certain things after the war and coming back, but he's a private eye. He's a private eye detective. He has a detective agency, and they get different mysteries and things that they need to solve. And so anyways, I really recommend it. The whole series is so good. First book is 5 stars. Every single one of them are 5 stars. It just gets better and better and better. The next category, the book I actually don't have because I am lending it to somebody right now, but it is A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. I think that's how you say it. This was one of the books that I did not want to leave the world that I was in. It took me some time to get used to his writing because he writes very lyrically, but not necessarily in a way that's hard to understand. It's just beautiful. Once you read a few pages, you kind of get how he writes, and then you're just fully immersed in the story. We're following a man who is exiled to house arrest in Moscow, but his place of residency at the time is actually in this massive hotel, and so he basically has to live the rest of his life in this hotel. In this hotel, there is restaurants, barbershops, ballrooms, like literally everything. It's not just a traditional hotel that we think of in the United States. So he has everything he needs there. We're following his life as he builds relationships with people. He works at the hotel. He builds relationships with his coworkers. He builds relationships with people that he comes in contact with, different guests and things. It's one of those books that I really can't tell you what the plot is, but if you love character-driven books, I really think that you're gonna love A Gentleman in Moscow. It is definitely more character-driven instead of plot-driven, but that doesn't mean there's no plot. There is still a general plot over the whole book, but that's not really why you read it. You read it because you fall in love with the main character, and you fall in love with the side characters, and you want their dreams to come true, and you want them to feel fulfilled in life. Like, you just love them like family. He kind of has a found family element in this hotel, so if you love a found family trope, you're gonna love A Gentleman in Moscow. It was so beautiful, so many lines that I put book darts in, and I marked in the pages. When I finished it, I wanted just to start it back over from the beginning because I didn't want it to end. The next book that I have in this genre is All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. I think Doerr is how you say it. This was one of the first books that I read when I started reading again a few years ago. I cannot put into words how much I love this book. This is a historical fiction taking place at the beginning of World War II. We are following this girl who is blind and her and her father navigating life. It goes back and forth between her perspective and the perspective of a little boy who is in an orphanage in Germany. He is basically forced to become a soldier because he's really smart. You're following different chapters going back and forth between what she's doing in France and what he's doing in Germany. You're like, how in the world is this going to come together? At the end of the book, they do end up coming together and the timelines meet, and it is so stunning. The writing is extremely unique, but also kind of approachable at the same time. And this is one of the books that got me teary. I feel emotional when I just think about it. That's how much I loved it. I am gonna reread this hopefully this year. I think that every single person should be required to read this. I think that this would be an amazing both character study and also just writing study. Like if you love English, you could learn a lot from his writing style. My next genre is romance. I have 2 books to share with you. The first one is Love and Other Words by Christina Lauren. Oh my goodness gracious. I wish that I could just read this book all the freaking time. This book takes place in October. We're following Macy and Elliot. They have like found each other again in their adult years after something happened in their relationship in the past that we don't know yet. It goes back and forth between the present and the past. In the past timeline, it's following them as children as they become friends and they fall in love with each other. And again, this book just has some deeper elements. If you are looking for a true rom-com, this is not it for you. This is more of a romance. If you want deep, heartfelt feelings and well fleshed out characters and characters who feel like real people who struggle with real things, which I guess is a theme in this video, you're gonna love this. I love Macy and Elliot so much. 2 Octobers ago, I read it for the first time, and last October I decided I needed to reread it. This book, just read it. Just read it. The next one is Beach Read by Emily Henry. This is my absolute favorite romance book, I think. Super closely tied with Love and Other Words, but I think that this one would probably be my favorite. We're following January and Augustus, or Gus. They are both writers. She writes, I think, general fiction, and he writes crime, something that's completely opposite. They're both in writing slumps and they don't know what to write, and so they end up being neighbors at this cabin place at a lake in Michigan, and so they get to know each other and they end up swapping genres and writing books for each other just to get out of the writing slump. Clearly there is a love romance element to this where they end up falling in love with each other. But what I love so much about Emily Henry's books in particular is that they lean a little bit more on the literary fiction side, because it really goes into depth on what each character is feeling and thinking and the things that they're having to work through, different traumas they're having to struggle with, and the characters communicate those things to each other as well as just thinking about them. So many of the things that these characters were struggling with I resonate with, and just made me sad for them and made me want to just give them a hug. I think that if you're wanting a rom-com, this is not for you. There are funny things in it and there are funny elements, but this is definitely more of a romance than it is a rom-com. And again, as I've said, I feel like with every single book, they feel like real characters. They feel like real people that I can walk next door to and hang out with. And I love that in a book. So Beach Read by Emily Henry. Alright, I've got 2 more books to talk about with you, and they are different genres. The first one I'm going to talk about is Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. I'm aware I read this book in like 24 hours or less. I flew through this book. Where to even begin with this book? It's one of those books that I feel like if I say too much, it might just give away the plot. Basically, it starts out, what's his name? I need to remember his name. Jason. We're following Jason. He's on the way home from work. He's like, can't wait to hang out with my family. He's got a son and a wife. He gets home, he's hanging out with family, and then all of a sudden he is being kidnapped, and he wakes up in a lab, and they're like, oh, you came back. And he's like, from where? And you basically just have to jump straight into the story from there. He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know what happened to his family. He doesn't know what the heck is going on. And it is a fast-paced book. There is one section in the middle that's a little bit slow, but it makes sense to the story. It's not like unnecessarily slow. You kind of need the details that are in there to get through the rest of the book. But otherwise, such a quick read. If you like thrillers, I recommend this. Technically, I think that this is sci-fi because of the things that are happening in here that I can't tell you. Even for somebody who doesn't read a lot of sci-fi, I really love this. I want to read more sci-fi. But that's a topic for another time. If you like thrillers or you just want something that is fast-paced and you're trying to figure out what's going on, this is a really great book, and we have lent this out. Me and my husband have both read this, and we've lent this out to several friends, and they have all loved it. So, highly, highly recommend this one. The last book that I am going to talk about is a nonfiction book, technically, and I'll explain a little bit more in a minute. So, we've got Educated by Tara Westover. This is a memoir. It's about her escaping a Mormon survivalist family. I don't read a whole lot of nonfiction. When I do, it's like a Christian book that I'm reading along with my quiet times or with somebody at my church. But this was recommended to me, and when I read about it, I had to read it. This reads like a novel. It does not read like nonfiction. It's got dialogue and descriptions and all the things, and so honestly, if you didn't see a memoir right here and you just started reading it, you would have no idea that it was nonfiction. But it's about her growing up in a Mormon survivalist family and eventually escaping, and it's incredibly eye-opening, and anybody, whether you're a spiritual person or not, I think could get a lot out of this. I really, really loved it. This is, again, one of the few books that has made me a little bit emotional. I really hope to read this again sometime. And that is my top 12 books of all time. Again, these are all 5-star reads, 6-star reads in my head. I recommend these to everybody. I love talking about these with you and hope you got to know me as a reader a little bit. Clearly, a few themes in this video is that I love characters that feel like real people. I love character-driven stories way more than I thought I did, and talking through these books made me really realize that. And 2, the books that feel intimidating are actually the best books. And I'm thinking specifically of All the Light We Cannot See and A Gentleman in Moscow. Y'all, you have to read them. You have to read them. So let me know in the comments, what are some of your favorite books? I would love to get to know you. I would love to hear the things that you like to read. Let's just have some dialogue in there. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed. I hope that you enjoyed hearing a little bit about the things that I like to read and the things that have stood out to me in the books that I love. And I can't wait to see you in the next one. So bye, friends.